And the
Yeah.
first thing I had to change was myself, because I grew up, command and control, my way or the highway, hard ass, telling people what to do and how to do it. And it hit me, people don't want to work for that type of leader anymore. They don't want to work in that environment. And I found out what they were most proud of in their lives that nobody at work knew anything about. And if you ever want to see somebody's eyes light up, ask them what they're most proud of that nobody knows anything about. And it's just totally revealing. And then I could use that to connect with people and let them know that I care about them. He brought me into his office and sat me down and said, "Mike, the easiest word in the English language to pronounce is no. But if you develop a professional reputation where the first word out of your mouth is no, then nobody's going to want to work with you." I realized that 50 or 60% of my job was either spent listening to my sailors or communicating back to them where we're going and why it's important. I call it connecting people to purpose. So I implemented no meeting Wednesdays on the ship. And what I found when I got there was people were spending their whole days in meetings. They were never getting anything done.
Hey everybody, Chris Del Trio, New Velocity, and really excited to have on the show today, best-selling author of It's Your Ship, Management Techniques from the Best Damn Ship in the Navy. And it's not just management techniques, it's truly leadership techniques. But Captain Mike Abrashoff, thanks for joining us.
Happy to be here, Chris.
Yeah, fantastic. And Mike and I talked for a few minutes here. He's down in outside of Miami Beach area, I believe, right? And
Correct.
very tropical, a little bit more tropical than I've got here in the Research Triangle Park area, especially today. It's cool and rainy. Good. So, Mike, we first met, gosh, I think it was 2017, give or take a year, at a seminar, Robin Sharmas in Zurich, Switzerland. So kind of a cool place. I really enjoyed meeting Mike, and, we got his book, and my first thoughts were great, another book on leadership. But then I heard your story and immediately fell in love with some of the concepts. The results that you had, which we'll get into here in a little bit, were amazing also. So I'm excited to have you on the show because, your leadership in the past, you're going to think of, okay, Stephen Covey, I'm a big fan. Maxwell's got great stuff out there. But what resonated at another level was what you accomplished and what you did with this crew to literally go from the worst ship in a lot of statistical areas to the most successful ship in the entire Navy. I've got a couple questions to get into, but first one, how the heck did you do that?
Well, I don't get to choose the missions we're assigned, and I don't get to choose the people I work with, and I can't go back and ask for more money to get the job done. And I could either have viewed myself as a victim, or I could figure out how to make it work with what I've been given. And the
Yeah.
first thing I had to change was myself, because I grew up, command and control, my way or the highway, hard ass, telling people what to do and how to do it. And it hit me, people don't want to work for that type of leader anymore. They don't want to work in that environment. And the best ones always have options. So I realized I'm the one who needed to change. And so I interviewed every sailor on the ship individually, all 310 of them. And I got to know their names, their spouse's name, their children's name, their hometowns. I found out what they were most proud of in their lives that nobody at work knew anything about. And if you ever want to see somebody's eyes light up, ask them what they're most proud of that nobody knows anything about. And it's just totally revealing. And then I could use that to connect with people and let them know that I care about them. And at the end of the day, if your shipmates know that you care about them, they will follow you into battle. So I'd like to tell you what we did was rocket science. It was just treating people with respect and dignity and listening to the people on the front line. And in every interview, I said to my sailors, I don't care what your age is, I don't care what your rank is, and I don't care how long you've been here. You can come to work every day and challenge every aspect of our operation. And if you have an idea how to improve a process, just 1%, I want to hear from you. I said, we can't change the rest of the Navy, but if we're 1% better today than we were yesterday and 1% better tomorrow than we are today, then nobody's going to touch us. And that's the performance came from the bottom up instead of me sitting in the captain's chair, barking orders and telling people what to do and how to do it. And this will be my last comment here. In one of the early interviews, a technician asked me how to do a procedure. And in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, he's the technician. Why is he asking me how to do this? And then it hit me. He wanted me to tell him how to do it so that if it didn't work out, he could just say, I was just doing what I was told to do. And
Right.
instead of telling him how to do it, I said, what do you think? If you own this ship, how would you do this? And he said, well, this is what I would do. He turned in flawless performance. He turned in better performance than if I told him how to do it because he owned it. And from that day forward, I stopped telling sailors how to do things and instead said, what do you think? And what do you think became it's your ship, which is what I used to say to my sailors.
Right.
You own it just as much as I do. If you see something that needs to be done, step up to the plate, take action, and I'll support you. And that's how we became a leader in our industry.
Yeah, great examples. Like I said, the concept for our listeners out there, whether they're fairly new to leadership or you've been doing this forever, the concept of empowering your people is not new. But my goodness, what a great example of it's your ship and letting them go and do these things. I'm glad you shared that one example. Steve Jobs was famous for talking about looking at computers through the lens of the consumer, the user. And why does it have to have a button that is sticking up? Why can't it be flush? Those kind of things. So everything was through that lens. And as I read your book for the second time preparing for this interview, I saw you were really driving that point home too. And you already kind of teed this up. You're asking them how they want to do it. One other thing I want to comment on is you and I were talking quickly, being March Madness season beforehand, about basketball. And I had an opportunity to talk to Coach K a couple years ago. And my biggest takeaway from talking to Coach K, when I said, how do you possibly, he was almost 75 at the time before he retired. I think he was 75. And I said, how do you coach and recruit these, 17, 18, 19, 20-year-old kids? Like, gosh, I'm like, how do you get them to see what Coach K see? And he's, oh, I don't do that at all. He says, I'm constantly changing and reinventing myself. He says, I have to change, not them. That blew my mind. I got to tell you, never thought of it that way. And I think here you are, captain of the most successful ship in the U.S. Navy, saying the same thing. So I'm really glad you shared that piece.
I was out walking around one day and I talked to a sailor and he says, Captain, we have a term to describe the organization on this ship. He said, this ship is like a tree full of monkeys. He said, you're the monkey at the top of the tree. On every branch, there's different levels of monkeys, and we're the monkeys in the bottom branch. And he said, whenever you look down from the top of the tree, all you ever see are smiling faces coming back at you. When we look up from the bottom branch, we have an entirely different view of the organization. And that was the day that I started putting myself in the shoes of my sailors and viewing the operation through their eyes. And it was then I realized I've got a multicultural workforce. I've got a multi-generational workforce, and each group speaks a different language. And like Coach K, I had to change the way I communicated to connect with each group in a language that they understand about where we're going and
Yeah.
why it's in our own best interest to be the best and why it's in their own best interest. So everything I did was try to connect what we were doing to their best interest. And that came because I put myself in their shoes and view the organization with their eyes.
That's fantastic. And, we call them BCOs, just the term that we use, behavior changing opportunities. So again, if you're brand new to leadership, you've been doing this for a while, I hope that's something that people take into account and do. I liked your example, the monkeys also. So I mentioned my father was in the Navy and he was a deckhand. He's the first to tell you when Mike and I, you both being from the Pittsburgh area, if you remember Newcastle, Pennsylvania, not the nicest place. And my dad talked about, who was a very successful chief financial officer, a wonderful, generous human being, the person I respect more than anybody. But he talked about, and my kids, so his grandkids love hearing the stories about he got in fights all the time and the kind of things that he did. So he goes to the Navy as a deckhand. And I kind of said, hey, Dad, I read, Mike Abrashoff's book. It's called It's Your Ship. And he talks a lot about command and control. And you even reference this isn't your father's Navy very respectfully, just saying that's how it is. It's command and control. And you did it completely differently. So I shared your methods with him. And my dad said, we're lucky if they used our name. He said it was Jackass was the nicest name you might have been called back then. So he says, that's amazing that he did this. But again, you kind of flipped the script upside down and did it differently. What was that like, the other captains you worked with, when they heard you abandoning this legacy way of teaching of command and control? Did you get some skepticism from your peers? What was that like?
So it was probably my biggest failure in command of the ship. And if you ask me, the bedrock of what caused our ship to excel is I tore down the silos among the 5 departments on the ship. And for the first time, the 5 department heads started working together. They drove that down to the lowest level in their departments. Then there was so much collaboration that we didn't waste any effort. And I guess I was so insecure, I was only focused internally. And I didn't put myself in the shoes of my fellow captains the way I put myself in the shoes of my sailors. And if I had, I probably would have seen a ship that was only focused on themselves and not the good of the battle group. And it wasn't until I got out of the Navy and was writing It's Your Ship that it hit me. Benfold was one ship of a 10-ship aircraft carrier battle group. And it wouldn't have mattered if we were the best ship. If one of the other ships didn't do their job and the aircraft carrier got sunk, then we would have been known as the battle group that failed in our mission. And if
Yeah.
I had one thing to go back and do over again, it would be to
Interesting.
put myself in the shoes of my fellow captains and figure out a way for the 10 of us to come together, collaborate, learn from each other. You know, I'm sure we weren't the repository for every great idea. I could have learned from them, but we have a macho culture that you don't learn
Yeah.
ships, and it's a stupid culture that I should have tried to change, but I wasn't smart enough to figure it out at the time.
You were dealing with, when you took over the ship, some of the statistics, some of the numbers that resonated with me is everybody was, whenever they could get off that ship, they were getting off. It was 2 years, they were not re-enlisting. And when you came back, especially in critical areas, if I'm not mistaken, certain areas were 100% retention after you were single digits prior to that. And one of the things that I read that really it kind of resonated from the perspective of when I work with sales teams, they often say, hey, there's a competitor in the area, but he or she's making way too much money. We can't afford them. We have to hire somebody with maybe less skill or at least less experience and coach them up. But you talked about a timeless challenge in the real world, and that's to help less talented people transcend their limitations. Can you share a little bit, both on the Navy, some examples of that, and then you speak all over the world now to corporate America also. What have you shared? What have you learned from other leaders that are sharing stories with you about that?
So it costs taxpayers a lot of money to recruit one person into the Navy and get him or her through 8 weeks of boot camp. Back in my day, it was probably $60,000 per person to pay for recruiter salaries and the physical running of the boot camp in Chicago. And a year ago, the Navy made an announcement because we're not meeting our recruiting quotas. You get a $50,000 signing bonus and just to walk through the front door. And so, but nobody was doing anything to keep them on the other end. And when you enlist for a 4 or 6 year contract. And the way the process used to work was we would wait for your contract to be up and you tell us whether you were going to get in or get out or stay in or get out. And by that time, your mind is already made up. If somebody comes and tells you that they're leaving you, they didn't make their mind up that morning. They've been thinking about it for 3 or 4 months and making their plan.
Mhm.
And so 9 months prior to a sailor's contract end date, I'd call that sailor up to my cabin for a retention interview. And I'd ask him or her point blank, are you thinking about staying in or are you going to get out? And if you're thinking about getting out, what is it that we could do now to help you change your mind? And what I heard from sailors was, gee, if you get me this education or get me this training, I'll stay. And the previous answer was, oh, we don't have $3,500 in the budget to keep you for another 4 years. Are you kidding me? We spent $100,000 to get you through the front door. We don't have $3,500 to get you a program that would keep you for another 4 years. So I would focus on one sailor at a time and give them what they need. And in my last year, as you said, our retention rate was almost 100%. We had the highest retention of any ship in the Navy that year. 2013, Benfold gets the Golden Anchor Award for the highest retention of any ship in the Navy. And it's just focusing on one person at a time. And I didn't have any home run hitters on the ship. But what I tried to do was to get every sailor to hit a single when they come up to bat. And
Yeah.
if you give me a team where every person hits a single, I'm going to the World Series. And so it wasn't about going after a superstar. It was about giving everybody the confidence and the skill set necessary to deliver. And they kind of lifted each other up. They learned from each other and had each other's back. And, sales, in my limited knowledge, is not about one individual person going out and do heroic things. I mean, it takes a whole team to deliver on what that salesperson is delivering on. And when you look at the value of that whole team, that's what customers should be focused on. And when I talk to sales teams, it's like, that person that you're working with, they report to somebody and you got to make them look good. And what I try to do is
Right.
to make my chain of command look good because they have to report to their chain of command. And if everybody is, making your stakeholders look good, they'll become loyal and dedicated and committed to you. And you don't have to be a superstar to realize that. You just have to be honest, genuine, and busting a gut to give your customer whatever they need to make them look good. And prior to getting command of the ship, I was a number 2 assistant to the Secretary of Defense. His name was William Perry.
Yeah.
And my last day working for him, prior to getting command of the ship, he brought me into his office and sat me down and said, Mike, the easiest word in the English language to pronounce is no. But if you develop a professional reputation where the first word out of your mouth is no, then nobody's going to want to work with you. He said, if you want to be successful in this life, develop a reputation where you will figure out a way to get to yes. And so that doesn't mean giving people everything they want when they want it. It means negotiating, finding things that help them accomplish their goals while you maintain what you need to do. And so that's what I've tried to do in command of that ship. And since I left the Navy, is to have a professional reputation where I will find a way to get to yes, make your customers look good, and they'll stay with you. And I've had clients that since I started speaking have gone to 4 different companies, and they've brought me into each company that
Right.
they go to. And to me, that's what every salesperson should strive to, is when their client moves to a different company that they take them with them. And that's how you grow your business. And that's the type of business that doesn't cost a dime to generate.
So yeah, referrals make the world go round, no doubt about it. Well, one of the questions I had to follow up, and you got into this, is making your bosses look good is something else you do. You mentioned your customers, but in your book, you talk about making your bosses look good, how they like to communicate, what they like, what they don't like. And you actually tell stories about, with Secretary of Defense William Perry, how you just, really protected his schedule, even against people much higher ranking than you. You were his bulldog. It sounds like you probably had a great relationship and learned quite a bit from him.
I did. It was a life-changing experience working for him and learning from him. But, with him, he was very disciplined. Meetings started on time, they ended on time, and every meeting had a resolution. It wasn't, you wait 15 minutes for the last person to show up, which to me is disrespectful to everybody else. And
I
then
love that.
the meeting without having a resolution. And so everything was very businesslike, and meetings started on time and they ended on time. And I was the bulldog, and I've told 4-star generals, your meeting's over, we're on to the next event. And the glares I would get, the audacity of this,
Yeah.
4-year-old commander telling a 4-star the meeting's over. But, I'm sure that they appreciate, the honesty. And I wasn't mean about it, but I just said the meeting's over. It's time to go. And William Perry backed me up 100% of the time.
So it's your ship, name of the book, and going from worst to first in anything, success leads tracks. I really hope our listeners take a look at this. You make this sound so simple to get more out of your people. You're just talking about being a human being and communicating at a whole nother level. In the book, and I remember this from when we talked in Zurich, they would call you Megaphone Mike. And I think that's important because something that I learned, and I'm constantly trying to become a better communicator. Ask my wife, she'll tell you I got a long way to go. But I've seen it in corporate America all the time, where in my world, it could be, I'm talking to a sales professional who says, well, I'm about 75% account management and 25%, prospector. And then I'll go talk to their leader and they'll say, oh yeah, they all prospect. That's what I'm like, well, they don't think that's what they do. I'm just constantly amazed about this. So I can't remember the exact name of the chapter, but it resonated again, like a lot of things are with me, where it was kind of like, communicate, communicate, communicate. And that just doesn't happen all the time. It's just glaring examples where that's void. So tell me a little bit about how Megaphone Mike came about, what you would do to have such outstanding communication.
I realized that 50 or 60% of my job was either spent listening to my sailors or communicating back to them where we're going and why it's important. I call it connecting people to purpose. And so I would listen, figure out where the opportunities for improvement are, and then communicate back in their language about what our purpose is and how I connected them to that purpose. And what got me thinking about that is week after I take command, I asked the sailor, well, what are we doing here? And he says, well, our job is to get you promoted. And it's like,
Good.
no, it's not your job. I would like to get promoted, but your job is not to get me promoted. Your job is to keep the ship safe and keep our fellow citizens safe. That taught me that there was a disconnect between what they thought their jobs were and what I wanted their jobs to be. And so I had a public address microphone right at my desk. And if something hit me during the day, I'd hit the button. I'd say, Benfold, this is the captain. This is where we're headed. I need your support. And it wasn't until after I left the ship that I find out that one of the nicknames the crew had for me was Megamite, because they said there wasn't a microphone that I didn't walk past without talking into it. And, and that's what leaders do, is communicate and get people on the same page so that we can, be united and go on for the excellence.
That's really good. Folks that are listening to this podcast are typically those that believe in that ongoing learning, self-improvement mentality. And they've heard the old adages, God gave you 2 ears, one mouth, use them proportionally, all those kind of things. But in your book, I really liked how you talked about listening and listening intentionally or with purpose. It might be how you said it. And I know my mentor back when before I was running Slazenger Golf, and I was, in sales and sales leadership, David Brannon. I could walk in and here he is, running $100 million company, doing 1,000 different things. And I would come from 4 or 5 hours away. I wasn't in town very often. And I might just pop in to say hi, and laptop would get shut. You were the only person in the room. I still feel like I'm terrible at that. And I don't mean it. And, even our cell phones, you read the statistics. If your cell phone is out, you're telling that person, well, you're important, but if this thing, rings, maybe something else is going on. Share with the audience a little bit about what you must have done to be an outstanding listener to win the hearts and minds of 310 people on that crew.
So I lost a relationship over the fact that the person said I didn't listen. And I was angry for 3 months. And then it hit me, I don't listen. That as you get older and more experienced, you have more experiences. I found myself cutting people off when they were speaking and telling them what the answer was. And I was angry for 3 months. And then it hit me, I don't listen, that I transmit way more than what I receive. So it was then I had to train myself to restrain myself to keep from interrupting people when they're speaking, instead listen to them. And then when I realized when I was listening that maybe there's a deeper problem here, that this person doesn't even understand themselves, and that by listening aggressively is what I call it, you can get the meta messages of what the real problem is, so that you're not just attacking the surface, you're attacking whatever the root cause is. So that's what I mean when I talk about listen aggressively, is I try to go deeper and get to the root cause of the problem so that you can improve the process. We can paper over with solutions, but if we don't improve the process, then it'll just keep coming back. So what that enabled me to do was to continue to improve the process by listening aggressively.
And, now you're better prepared. Something you said earlier, I really like, people to purpose. And, if you give them some purpose, look out with what's really going to happen. I think that's fantastic also. So jumping a little bit here, I have something that we teach called stories of strategic intent, and stories make the world go round. I think Peter Guber authored the book Tell to Win, and he talks about when you tell a story, it takes somebody on this magic carpet ride where they get their guard down and they listen. They can listen better because you're telling a good story. Needs to be strategic. If you're done telling the story and they're like, why the heck did you just tell me that story? That can be a problem. But you talked about the one, and you'll know what I'm talking about in a second, the Zodiac story and the chaplain visiting your ship. And the takeaway for this was, I think it was, keeping things light in heavy times. I don't think I got that exactly right, but it was something along those lines. And I think that's important because, and here you are, running this ship for the, US Navy. Our listeners are trying to hit their quarterly numbers, trying to bring shareholder value, those kind of things. It's not life and death like you dealt with. But even in those tense situations, you would bring levity to things. Share a little bit about the Zodiac story. I think our audience would love that.
It was a beautiful fall day in the northern Persian Gulf. It was like 75 degrees. The sun was shining, but it was a time when Saddam Hussein was out of the box, and we were put up there to prepare to launch Tomahawk cruise missiles against him. And it was a Sunday afternoon, and nothing was going to happen that day. And times had been tense. We had been on alert for a long time, and I figured we needed to have a diversion to have some fun. We have two Zodiac boats on our ship that are meant for rescuing somebody if they fall in or whatever. And we did not have a chaplain assigned to us, but the aircraft carrier had like 5 chaplains. And whenever they got overwhelmed with people's problems, they would come to Benfold for a vacation because
Mm.
my sailors didn't have any problems because we solved them all. And so the chaplain was over from the battle group, and I decided to have Zodiac races in the northern Persian Gulf, 100 miles south of Kuwait. And the news back home was the Navy is getting ready to attack Baghdad. Our families were nervous. And then my sailors started sending emails back that we were having Zodiac races in the northern Persian Gulf. And boy,
That's
did I
awesome.
get from the spouses. They were livid that they're back there nervous and we're having boat races. So anyway, we all afternoon we raced. I set up a course in the Persian Gulf and we raced Zodiacs, and the chaplain refused to get out of the boat. He was in the boat for like 5 straight hours, and it was probably the most fun day of his life. But it was a way to break up the monotony and to have some fun and generate some camaraderie while doing serious work. And if the Navy ever asked, those rib boats need maintenance.
Yep.
And Zodiac boats, the term for it in the Navy is RIB, RHIB, rigid hull inflatable boat, but it's a Zodiac. But those boats need maintenance and they need runtime. And I need to train the coxswains. So
Of
it was
course.
training while we were on patrol in the northern Persian Gulf.
Yeah, morale is so important. You talk about engagement, what we need to do to get folks to want to do a good job. Even your example where somebody on the crew was saying their job is to get you promoted, where, I see where they're going with that, but again, that isn't what you were looking for. You were trying to instill some different behaviors. Something else that I wrote down is that the art of leadership lies in the simple things. I think it's a great summary of what you do in the book, and so many wonderful examples that you have. Common sense things that increase morale are important, but you probably agree with this. Common sense is not always commonplace. My biggest takeaway probably from your book was what how intentional you were about trying to increase morale and engagement. And you've probably seen this, I'm sure you have, Maslow's hierarchy of employee engagement. And today less than 15% of corporate employees are at the pinnacle. They're at the top. They're disengaged. That's where you've got absenteeism, you've got presenteeism, which they're there, but they can't wait to get out of there. And it's so difficult to hire new employees. You got to make sure that you're engaging the ones you have. And again, I think our leaders are going to learn so much from It's Your Ship. Talk to me a little bit about what we talked about before we got into this, the 74% number that you just told me.
So 74% of young Americans age 18 to 24 are not eligible to serve in our military today, either due to health problems, obesity, lack of mental acuity, drug usage, felony convictions. 74% of young people are not eligible to serve in our military. And so that should be a wake-up
Mm.
call to corporate America that they probably don't want that 74% either. There are exceptions, if somebody has asthma or whatever, but it's a wake-up call that there's not an endless pool of labor waiting out there to come work for you. And that if you want the best and the brightest, you've got to develop that culture where people want to come be a part, where they feel like they're being treated with respect and dignity, where they feel like they're making a difference. And when they can go home at night and say, yeah, I accomplished something today. And so corporate America needs to up their game if they're going to hope to have the workforce support them to drive performance. And at the end of the day, that's what this is all about. It's not about being liked. It's not about being popular. It's driving performance no matter what you're doing,
Yeah.
whether you're serving on a ship or selling golf clubs. It's about controlling your own economic destiny. And no organization's future is assured today around the world. You got to go out and
Mm.
fight for it each and every day. And this is how you control your own destiny by being intellectually curious and by looking at every process and say, how can we do this a little bit better? And taking ownership and responsibility for the results. And that's what I try to instill on the ship. And that's what I talk about in my presentations is, you got to go out and fight for it every day because nobody's going to hand you anything these days.
That's great. Well, back to it's common sense that it's not happening enough. You tell another story that resonated about getting your employees to see how your crew, in this case, how they saw you're going to bat for them. And I took some notes on it. I think you were on your way to Singapore, if I remember this correctly. And do you remember the story? I'd much rather have you say it. Where I think normally, because where you were with the boat or the boat, how am I doing? The ship, you were going to be last that day to kind of be able to come into port and first leave in the morning. Do you remember this story? Share
Correct.
that story. I think our audience would love this story.
It was going to Pearl Harbor. We left San Diego, 7-day transit. We were doing an exercise designed to increase our ability to defend ourselves. Very important exercise. The admirals embarked on the USS Harry W. Hill conducting the exercise. And we're out there with a third ship, USS Gary. And the plan was for the exercise to be over at 5 p.m. the following Friday afternoon, at which point we would enter Pearl Harbor, spend the night in Waikiki. Well, instead of being over at 5 p.m. that evening, it was unexpectedly over at 9 a.m. that morning. We had achieved all the objectives. The admiral declared it a success. And we are sitting off the coast of Waikiki, steaming in circles, wasting fuel, waiting for 5 o'clock to roll around because that's what the plan called for. And the way we enter port in the Navy is by the date of rank of the senior officer on each ship. I was the junior captain by date of rank. We would go in last. Everywhere we went, we would always go in last. And the admirals embarked on Harry W. Hill, so they were to go in first. I call the captain of the Harry W. Hill, and I'm calling him on an encrypted satellite voice radio. Any sailor on any of the 3 ships can punch in the button and listen to the conversation.
This is the part I love. Yep.
I said, why don't you ask the admiral if we could go in early today? He said, I can't. I've got an engineering problem. I can only fix it at sea. I've got to stay out. I called the captain of the next ship, USS Gary, who was a my way or the highway guy, excoriated me in public, telling me to mind my place and that we're going in last. So I called the admiral, and I could tell by the gruff tone of his voice he'd been listening to these 2 conversations. And it was like, who the heck are you to challenge the plan? What's your reason? And I said, well, sir, we're steaming in circles, wasting fuel, wasting taxpayers' money. I've got a piece of broken equipment I can only fix in port. And I said, reason number 3, I want to put my crew on the beach early in Waikiki today. And to my utter amazement, he said, permission granted. I was 2 decks above the operations center where 30 sailors were on watch. When he said permission granted, I could hear cheering through 2 decks of steel. And we have 4 engines on our ship, and our normal configuration is only to steam on 1 engine because it's our most fuel efficient. We can do up to 18 knots on 1 engine. So unless it's an emergency, everywhere we go in the Navy is 18 knots or less. But you can do 24 knots on 2 engines and use twice the amount of fuel. You can do 27 knots on 3 engines, and you can do 31 knots on 4 engines. When the admiral said permission granted, I put all 4 engines online, came up to full power. And when our ship is at full power, it is a sight to behold. It kicks up a rooster tail of water that's 2 stories high.
Wow.
Ship vibrates from the power of these 4 engines. We scream into Pearl Harbor at full speed, tied up by 10:15, cruise off the ship by 10:45, on their way to Waikiki, and never did save taxpayers 1 drop of fuel that day. Next day, we'd underway to continue our transit. And the first sailor comes up for his interview and he says, Captain, it seems to us, the crew, that you don't care if you ever get promoted again. And I said, what on earth are you talking about? He said, what you did for us yesterday. He said, you had nothing to gain. You did it for us. We want you to know we got your back. And that was the day that the crew started to trust me. And for the first time, started to trust each other, where we had each other's backs. And that's something that I did not anticipate coming from that. And if I had gotten caught for the fuel, there's a requirement 1 day a quarter, you have to have a full power trial. where you put all 4 engines online to make sure all the parameters and the engine room are working properly. And that was the day I chose to come up to full power.
Oh, well, in your book, you talk about taking calculated risks. We're going to call that a calculated risk. But, we joke about this. We make decisions emotionally. We justify them logically. Logically, save taxpayer money. You had something that can only be fixed in port. Emotionally, give 310 guys a day at the beach. So, yeah, I have no doubt that they had your back after that. Those are the kind of things I think we need to do more of in corporate America, because we do get hung up on command and control is what you have. This is how we've always done it. So we're going to do it this way. And it doesn't even make sense. Empowering our people to let them be, often they know how to do their job better than some manual that was put together a decade prior. So you brought up so many great things for us. Mike, what else?
I banned that's the way we've always done it on our ship. My sailors were not authorized to utter that on USS Benfold.
Perfect. Yeah. Well, you certainly brought new concepts, the innovation, everything else. What else for the last question I'll throw at you? Corporate America is listening to this, a lot of young leaders, senior leaders that need a little bit of change of pace. What have you seen as you've gone around and you speak all over the country? What are you seeing leaders do in corporate America today that they're taking from your book, they're implementing and having outstanding results?
So I implemented no meeting Wednesdays on the ship. And what I found when I got there was people were spending their whole days in meetings. They were never getting anything done. And so I declared Wednesdays would be my gift to my senior officers and supervisors, that this is your day to get your priorities done. So anyway, I read one of Jeff Bezos's management principles is they have no meeting Wednesdays at Amazon. And I don't know if he read my book or not, but it's right out of my book. And so I think that, so as a result of COVID, everybody's now doing Zoom or Teams meetings. And I know people now, they're booked on Zoom from 8 in the morning until 6 at night. How do you get any work done when all you're doing is going from one Zoom meeting to the next? And it's like, not much. You could get more productivity accomplished from less meetings, in my opinion, than what corporate America has today. And then, so my last thing for corporate America is, due to the demographics, there aren't 10 people standing in line waiting to come work for you. And that it's cheaper to retain the talent that you have and grow them and invest in them than it is to lose them and have to go out and find a replacement in this day and age, especially when the demographics aren't in your favor. And everyone on this call, every business in America, every organization in America, we are in the people business. And it all comes down to how we connect with them and how we engage them and get them to take ownership and drive performance. Because at the end of the day, that's what it's about, performance.
Yeah, that's going to be a popular one in corporate America. I'm going to make sure we segment that one out. No meeting Wednesdays, eliminate some Zoom calls. People are really going to like that. We are in the people business. We're in the trust business. I think it was Stephen Covey's son authored a book, Speed to Trust. And your book has trust written all over it. So it's your ship management techniques for the best damn ship in the Navy. And they're really, you manage things, you lead people, is a saying I heard many years ago. It's certainly not for me. I stole that from somebody. But this really is leadership techniques. And I think it's the first 10, 11, 12 chapters, whatever it is, where you definitely lay out your playbook. But for me, there was so much about leadership here, and your stories and your examples. It's something I hope everybody reads and they can reach out to you directly. And what should people do if they want to reach out to maybe have you come and do a sales kickoff or a company-wide keynote? How can they get a hold of you, Mike?
My website is apgleadership.com, apgleadership.com. And I'm all over the internet. You can find me, Mike Abrashoff.
Yeah.
I'm happy to come speak to your organization.
You're all over the internet in the way that I try to aspire to be all over the internet, being relevant. No Facebook pages, no pictures of salads. I think we have that in common. So we're there. Captain Mike, great book, great talk. Thanks for joining us today.
You got it. Thanks, Chris.